I'd like to credit my friend Andrew Keel for inspiring this episode. Andrew once told me a deal is like a table with 3 legs. If any one leg is removed, the whole table falls apart. To piggyback off the episode, starting with nothing, on this episode, we're going to talk about more ways you can monetize your business specifically from the deal itself.
Warning. This podcast features the truth about owning and operating mobile home parks. The following program is not designed to be sexy. It will not hype you up on MHPs. Rather, this is a raw take on this industry and how you find your own path to success. Welcome to MHP IRL, Mobile Home Parks in Real Life, with your host, Ryan Norris.
The 3 legs of a deal include the willing seller, the money, and the operations. Given that the absence of any one of those legs would kill the deal, each leg inherently comes with added value due to its essentiality. In other words, you deserve compensation for bringing any one of them to the table. Now, let's talk about how you can monetize each. Chapter 1. A willing seller. Without a willing seller, you have nothing. And that is worth something. Getting someone to let go of something they've owned for years, if not decades, can be excruciatingly difficult and time-consuming. Like one of my closest mentors says, you can't force someone to sell you their real estate. That's important to keep in mind when cold calling and interacting with owners. Whether you wined and dined someone for a few years or found something on LoopNet, there are several appropriate ways to compensate yourself or those responsible for making it happen. Those include finder's fees, front-end equity promotes, back-end equity promotes, and general partner participation. Finder's fees are the easiest, simplest way. They come in the form of a percentage of the purchase price to just a flat fee. They also can be avoided altogether if the deal is super skinny. We have cashed out finder's fees. We also have left them in deals. We also have foregone them altogether. It all depends on the deal itself. If you obtain a broker's license, this can allow you to monetize a deal that doesn't fit your strategy. Imagine finding an awesome deal that, for whatever reason, just doesn't make sense to you in your situation. If you can connect that willing seller with an appropriate buyer, you can compensate yourself with a referral fee from either the seller or the buyer. Front-end equity promotes. This is essentially leaving a finder's fee in a deal rather than cashing it out. You'll put your own money in the deal, but your money counts more towards the equity than others. For example, using round numbers. If the capital raise is $100,000 and you put in only $25,000, instead of you having 25% of the deal, you could receive a front-end equity promote that boosts you to 50% of the deal. In this way, your $25,000 really counts as $50,000, and the investor's $75,000 only counts as $50,000. Now, why would any investor want their $75,000 to decrease by $25,000 day one? Simple. The investor is compensating you for finding the deal and or doing the bulk of the operations. Another important consideration is that if you are starting with nothing like I did, you won't have enough liquidity to satisfy a bank's recourse requirement, meaning your JV investor will be signing recourse with you. That means your investor will require compensation for this additional risk. And also, your equity percentage might come with an upper limit dictated by the bank's debt covenants. Back-end promotes. This is compensation in the form of an equity boost after a certain return or IRR is achieved. This can get complicated, like with a waterfall structure, where basically you have a multi-tiered compensation structure. Or it can be as basic as you put up 25% of the equity raise of the deal, and if you can deliver, say, a 15% IRR in X number of years while supporting a boost of your equity to 50%, then your equity gets promoted to 50% upon delivering those returns to your investor. Allowing someone to be in the GP pool. We've covered the difference between general partners and limited partners before, so I won't reopen this. But to summarize, the general partners take on more risk and are thus entitled to more compensation. If you are also starting with nothing, you may have to welcome someone into your GP pool. A lot of people want to be GPs, but then not add any additional value to the deal. This is not legal, according to the SEC, unless it's a joint venture in which that party will have to justify some reasonable level of involvement. If you aren't doing a JV, you really need to consider a private placement memorandum or PPM, even if you don't want to start a fund. In my opinion, it is better to pay up for a good attorney to make sure you are in accordance with the law rather than wing it and hope you aren't doing anything illegal. Each of these compensation packages comes with different short-term and long-term benefits, disadvantages, and implications. If you're starting with nothing, you will likely need to gravitate towards front-end promotes and compensation packages that allow you to eat in the short term, but cap your upside in the long term. If you have liquidity, the big money is in the back-end promotes. As always, each person's end game is going to be different. Sure, money today is usually worth more than money tomorrow, but sometimes that back-end promote is so lucrative you can stomach not getting paid for several years before you can sell or refinance and tap that newly created equity. Chapter 2. The money. So, you convinced an owner to sell to you. That's great. But now, the seller is expecting money in exchange for their asset. And if you don't have access to capital, you don't have a deal. That capital can come in two forms: debt and/or equity. I've heard of zero-down seller carry options. I've heard of all-cash deals. Most deals, however, are some combination of debt and equity, usually between, say, 60% and 85% loan-to-value, also known as LTV. If you do the math, you'll clearly see why you want to maximize LTV. Regardless, debt is almost always cheaper than equity, so you'll want to maximize debt. Generally speaking, smaller deals are more expensive from both the debt and equity side. Simply put, smaller deals are riskier. You're exposed to a similar amount of risk from things like infrastructure failing, while taking in less cash flow. Your equity partners will deserve more compensation for this additional risk. Banks will offer worse debt terms, again, to compensate for the elevated risk. Expect to grind out call after call to smaller, more local banks for these smaller deals and/or hairier deals. Like I've said previously, for our first deal ever, we called on 40 banks and received 40 no's. We had to have our investor partner pull a favor to get the deal funded. Bigger deals are no walk in the park either. You may find yourself dialing for dollars because you and your typical investors don't have enough cash to take it down. Private equity shops can be helpful there, but come with their own assortment of pros and cons. Like I mentioned earlier, you can start your own PPM, but again, that'll come with its own pressures and serious drawbacks. While banks will start to compete for your business on bigger deals, Some bigger deals are very hairy, and you may wind up grinding out banks for bigger deals just like you would on smaller deals. This all leads to my ultimate point. Where there is difficulty, there is value. If you can secure debt where others can't, or you have a rock star investor no one else has access to, then that's worth something. So how do you compensate for that? Really? Just more of the same. Finder's fees, referral fees, front-end promotes, and room to be a co-GP. Chapter 3. The Operations. Despite how this industry has been branded, this isn't a passive investment. Someone needs to run the park. And if it's anything less than a clean, stable, smaller opportunity, you can't expect a $10 per occupied pad lot manager to have the motivation and skills to get the job done. Worse, if you've opted for a hairy deal, in my experience, you can't even expect a $30,000 to $40,000 a year experienced manager to successfully turn the park around. You'll either need to do it in-house, like we do, or find a third-party company to manage it for you. Third-party management companies do exist, but let me tell you, they're way more expensive than you'd think. And again, if your deal is hairy, you should expect to pay up. I have some seriously good news for those starting with nothing. Of the hundreds of people I've met in this industry, I can count on one hand the number of people I've met that truly enjoy being on site turning their properties around knee deep in operations. What does that mean for you? Since no one wants to do it, you can do it, and for a price. What are some ways you can compensate the operations? Asset management fees. This can be a percentage of gross revenue, NOI, or distributable cash flow. Front-end and or back-end equity promotes. The thought of exchanging my sweat equity for deal equity kept me motivated to consistently put in 12-hour days on site, hundreds of miles away from my wife, living in a double wide with nothing in it for over a year. When structured properly, these can prove extremely effective. Salaries. Finally, you can just straight pay someone a flat rate. While this makes budgeting and forecasting much easier, you also open up the door to an employee not consistently going the extra mile and leaving right as the clock strikes 5 p.m. This episode is about how you can monetize the 3 legs of a deal. So I won't cover compensation for others you hire or partner with should you decide against going into operations and you decide to outsource some or all of that work. But I feel compelled to say that incentives are everything. Even a profitable, successful deal on paper can go south quickly if everyone's incentives aren't aligned properly. You've really got to cut to the core of what motivates the management and be willing to adjust on the fly if you made a mistake. This even applies to yourself and your own motivations. I'm about to confess something that may come back to seriously bite me one day. But I've decided to share this with you because I think that you'll benefit to hear what I experienced. Besides, this can't be in real life if I don't say some seriously real stuff. So here it is. I've looked retroactively at what Ian and I have accomplished over these last few years, dedicating our lives to this and making painful sacrifices. And I have felt slighted at what I actually got to keep compared to others involved. It's like Ian and I did everything, and this is all we keep? It felt like FOMO, but on steroids. Because I know it was my fault. I agreed to the terms. I signed on the dotted line. So how dare I be upset? So why am I publicly admitting I felt I undercut myself on my own compensation? I want you to realize that even when things go well, you and those you partner with will feel this way at some point and to some degree. Ultimately, for me, those feelings were short-lived. I got over them once I remembered I started with nothing. I had no experience. I had no network. I had no money. I was a 20-something with big dreams and little to back it up. Those we partnered with took huge risks on Ian and I, signing full recourse and stroking big checks of their own hard-earned money. They deserved every penny for stomaching our rookie mistakes and growing pains as a new company. Better yet, they've continued to be instrumental in our ongoing growth and development. It's human nature to be greedy, but I personally don't regret a thing about what I have agreed to in the past. Earning my black belt in martial arts as a teenager helped teach me that you can't skip ranks. You must put in the time and pay your dues, all while maintaining character and humility. But that is within your own control. Let my fleeting moment of greed and weakness serve as a warning to you that you and those you partner with will feel those same feelings to some degree in both good times and bad times. You can't control how others behave, but you do choose those you partner with. Can you imagine how ugly my story would have ended had I come to a different conclusion or had I lacked character or humility? Choose wisely, y'all. And if you only take away one thing from this episode, it's that you need to make sure everyone's incentives are aligned. Would having my due diligence list help you? If so, I will let you have it for free. That's right. My list that took me 3 years to develop and includes plenty of fixes for mistakes that I made that now you can avoid. All absolutely free. All I ask for in exchange is leave me a 5-star review and a comment. Screenshot your comment after it goes live and email it to me at my website, archimedesgrp.com. Afterwards, let's connect. This episode was inspired by a listener just like you. Even if you don't have any ideas for future episodes, let's still connect, as I'm sure there are ways you and I can help each other out. I'm looking forward to chatting soon.